Good morning, Dan and Amy. On the matter of sanctuary cities, of course, Chicago being one, Cook County being a sanctuary county, the state of Illinois moving to become a sanctuary state, and of course, sanctuary campuses, sanctuary this and sanctuary that.
Sanctuary restaurants.
Sanctuary restaurants. We're not going to comply, work with, facilitate federal law enforcement. Such an interesting position for duly elected officials sworn to uphold the Constitution to take, but that's exactly what's happened. Several hundred cities around the country. And it's not just the high-profile cases that we've talked about, the Kate Steinleys, that rape case in that high school in Maryland. There's so many individual cases, and and you've had the family members of victims testify before Congress. Trump has elevated and amplified their stories. He included one gentleman at his first address. Right, back in January.
State of the Union. Well, it wasn't State of the Union.
Yeah, but effectively that, correct. And but I mean, I remember just over the last couple of years when former ICE director Sarah Saldana would go testify before Congress, and the exchanges she had with Senator Ted Cruz.
Oh, they're classics.
You're talking about tens of thousands of persons they know are violent criminals, committed felonies in addition to being in this country legally, that are released. We're talking about murders and rapes and assaults and DUIs and released. And this continues to be my personal bugaboo on the topic. You want to talk about immigration reform, and you want to talk about people who are seeking asylum, and you want to talk about H-1B visas and the rest of it. It is impossible to talk about reconceiving our immigration legal regime if you cannot do, being the federal government, what everybody says they want to see happen, which is persons that are violent felons to be removed from this country, sent back to wherever they came from. If you can't achieve that, then how do you expect anybody to contemplate anything else you want to do in terms of reconceiving immigration policy in this country? I just don't think Dems have a particularly good response on that, nor do some of the kind of Gang of Eight-type Republicans. For more on this topic, per an op-ed he and a colleague penned in the Philly Inquirer, Sanctuary Cities Enable Criminals. This is Stephen Thayer, who was a U.S. Attorney for New Hampshire by Reagan and Justice on the Supreme Court of New Hampshire, and Alfred Regnery, who is the chairman of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund and served in the Department of Justice under President Reagan. Mr. Regnery joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Glad to be with you.
So the title of the piece, as I said, Sanctuary Cities Enable Criminals. The Attorney General, Sessions, has moved on and indicated he's going to move on sanctuary cities. It's an open question if other federal agencies will follow suit or if the Republican Congress and President Trump are going to back up their tough talk with tough action as it pertains to funding in particular. Is that the way forward, do you think, in terms of trying to chasten sanctuary cities and those political elites, is to use the power of the purse?
Well, it's one way to do it. There are limits. The federal government can't simply cut off all the money that goes to the city of Chicago,
right?
Because it doesn't like what it's doing. That's unconstitutional. But in some cases they can, and it may be effective. Money talks, of course. It's really a matter of common sense. I mean, you mentioned the statistics and where it is, and talk to the victims. You know, that is the place where the rubber meets the road, if you will. As you said, there are thousands of cases of victimization committed by people that shouldn't be in this country, and the statistics are pretty clear that a few people commit most of the crimes. I mean, the immigrants don't have a higher crime rate than people that aren't immigrants. I mean, we don't really know the statistics. The research isn't particularly good, but across the board, it's pretty clear that usually when the research is done, they find that, say, 5 or 6% of the population commits 85-90% of the crime. Mm-hmm. And you've got a horrible murder rate in Chicago, and my guess is that if the police were able to round up 100 people in those neighborhoods where you have high murder rates and lock them up, you probably see your murder rate fall dramatically.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's the same with immigrants. I mean, most immigrants are perfectly law-abiding citizens. They have jobs. They want to earn a living. They want to raise their families just like the rest of us. But there are a few of them, and that's what happens is when one of these people is picked up, and he does have a criminal record of an immigrant, particularly illegals. The Department of Homeland Security asks the city to detain him for 48 hours so they can figure out what to do with him and deport him if they have to. That's where the sanctuary cities issue comes in. That they say, no, we're not going to abide by your request to detain him. The federal government can't demand that they do it. It's really just a request. It's up to the city. So if they let one of these people go, which happens again and again, these are people primarily who are those 5 or 6% who are committing most of the crime. So, you may have a guy that is let out who's going to commit 4 or 5 crimes before he gets picked up again. And that's what drives the crime rate to where it is.
Well, how many illegals do you think commit crimes in other places and then go to hide in sanctuary cities?
I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else knows either. I mean, it would just be common sense that, say, somebody's making his living committing robberies on the street. It's the easiest crime to commit. It's the hardest to solve. If he knows he's going to get picked up and released, I mean, if I were doing it, I would go to a place where they would release me rather than detain me and ship me back to where I came from. I think they're probably smart enough to figure that out.
And in your piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer, you cite a report from Department of Homeland Security that in just one 3-week period in February, 245 immigrants were released from custody despite requests from DHS that they be detained. A former law professor at John Jay College analyzed the ICE data, finding 45 of those crimes were extremely serious, including homicide, rape, robbery, burglary, aggravated assault. More than 200 were less serious crimes, but included possession of illegal weapons, domestic violence, and sexual assault. It's this kind of story, or this kind of anecdote, snapshot, that just has people scratching their head. Wait, if I'm accused of any of those crimes, I'm not going to be why are they being released in the first place, even before you get to the DHS detainer for deportation?
Well, and we don't know that. Some of them may not have been. Some of them may be in the system. They may be detained in the detention center waiting for trial. They may have been.
Okay.
Their cases may have been pled. Who knows? That we don't know that. All we do know is that there were these 245 people in that 3-week period who were released against the request of DHS that did have some kind of a criminal record. So, and as you say, those people committed 245 crimes. So if you extrapolate that to the whole year, there are 4,000 or 5,000 of those crimes, presumably, if that is a representative time,
right,
that were committed. And there are probably actually a lot more than that, because for every arrest, there's usually 5 or 6 crimes committed. So, nobody really knows that. They're and just looking at your statistics in Chicago, I think about 30% of your murders are actually closed. That means that they actually caught the perpetrator and they tried him or whatever. He's in prison. Oh, that's only a third of them. So there's 2/3 of those people that were murdered still running around in Chicago. I mean, these are not people that have a job and they decide to go out one day and murder somebody and then go back to work. No.
Right.
These are full-time career criminals.
Right.
That's what they do all day long. So, again, it's that the recidivism rate, I think, is the thing that you have to think about first. These are the people that are causing the problem and who should be deported.
Well, so knowing all of this, I mean, does it surprise you that Democratic politicians are still pulling for sanctuary cities? Because the only reason why they're doing it is for the vote, right?
If you know the way liberals think, no, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, it probably makes them feel good. And then there's always the question, are they pandering to a community that's going to vote for them? And, that's sort of a politically incorrect thing to say, but I've been accused of that before. And that's the way it is. I mean, Hispanics have a tendency to vote for Democrats, and Democrats need the votes. And so that's certainly a piece of it.
Yeah, it seems to me part of the messaging should be forget what the Democrats are saying in this binary. It's just talking to these communities, say, who wants criminals, who wants predators released back into their neighborhood? Nobody.
Nobody does.
That's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Talk to the victims.
Yeah, right.
It's going to destroy your day, and a lot more than that, depending what happens. But I guess there are a few enough crime victims who don't speak out as compared to the larger population who were voters that you add it all up, and that's where it comes down.
How important, I should say, do you think that that office for victims that Trump announced he was creating within DHS, is that just window dressing, or is that a real thing?
Well, it's probably more window dressing than anything else. It always takes a long time for something like that to get up and running. It sounds good. Probably help a few people, but who knows? The federal government doesn't have a great record of doing things very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, what we really need to help people is to enforce the frickin' law, obviously. All right,
Get a few people off the street makes a big difference.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Go to any neighborhood and ask a cop that is in that neighborhood, how many people in this neighborhood do you have to get out of here to drop the crime rate? He'll tell you.
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
no, but they did. Remember, our superintendent Eddie Johnson came out and said there's 56 people that 1,500
people.
Oh, sorry, that we know are going to commit a crime.
Are either going to be murdered or they're going to murder. And you're talking about 800 murders, 4,300 shootings last year in Chicago. And you're right, Mr. Regnery. That's exactly what our police superintendent said. There's 1,500 people we know that are essentially the main culprits and going to represent some of the victims, a great proportion of the victims as well. So, this is it. It's that small subset, but you have to be serious about interdiction with that small subset.
That's right. They lock them up. And, that's one reason over the last 20 years the crime rate has gone down so much in this country is because those career criminals, those repeat offenders are in prison. And that's primarily what makes up the prison population, and that's a good thing.
He is Alfred Regnery, former Reagan DOJ official, now the chairman of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. He, along with his colleague Stephen Thayer, former U.S. Attorney for New Hampshire under Reagan and Justice for the Supreme Court of New Hampshire, have penned this piece, Sanctuary Cities Enable Criminals. That's worth a read. Mr. Regnery, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.